Welcome to the Productivity Show, a podcast where we believe that you can get the important things done without having to sacrifice your health, family, and things that matter to you. My name is Tan Pham, and I'm the founder and CEO of Asian Efficiency, where we help people become more productive at work and in life. And today we have a special episode, not only with my co-host, Brooks Duncan, of course, who's here with me today, but also we're going to be talking about some interesting topics today, like how we can use AI to make us more productive. Evernote got sold recently. Also, we have a bunch of companies in the UK going the route of the 4-day work week, and we're going to be talking about that as well. So there's a lot of stuff to go over today, which I'm really excited about. But just to give you a little bit of a backstory, just in case you're new to the Productivity Show, I'm the founder and CEO of Asian Efficiency. I started this company back in 2011 as a passion project to help people become more productive at work and in life. And my co-host, Brooks Duncan, came from a completely different direction. Brooks, would you mind quickly sharing your story with everybody here?
Yeah, I came to productivity because I was working in a large corporate and I had kids and I was trying to figure out how to juggle it all. So that's what led me in that direction. I wasn't part of Asian Efficiency back in 2011. I joined later in 2017. I was actually a customer first. So I think I bought OmniFocus Premium Posts, and then I met Tan, I think at a party for Smile Software, the company that makes Text Expander. I'm sure I was drinking a bourbon because that seems like that's what I do when I go to the United States for some reason. But yeah, we started the podcast basically because we wanted to help people become more productive at work and in life, like Tan said. And every week what we do is we share tips and strategies to help you be more productive. We really believe, Tan says this all the time, that happy people are productive people. So what we want to do is we want to help you win back time. We want to give you more energy, and we want to help you get focused on what matters. And sometimes we have guests, sometimes it's just Tan and I. And what we really like getting is listener feedback. So for example, we had feedback from a listener named Christy, and she says, I really love your podcast and your general webcasts. It helps her stay abreast of the latest news in productivity whenever I start to slip into old ways, which happens to all of us. And yeah, I really like that feedback from Christy because yeah, productivity is a journey. We all know that. It's not like a switch where you flip and all of a sudden you're magically productive. So we're really happy that Christy is along with on her journey and while we go through our journey. So if you have any feedback for us, please drop us an email at support@asianefficiency.com or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. So Tan, why don't you get us started off and share what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, so we like to do episodes every now and then where we talk about what's happening in the productivity industry and specifically around apps, trends that we're noticing. So one event that happened recently is that the company Evernote, which I'm sure you've heard of the app Evernote itself, recently got sold. And so we're wondering, what does this mean? Should we still use Evernote? Do we still recommend it? What happens with Evernote moving forward? We're all going to be discussing this here today. Also, there's another company, Zapier, which you might have heard of. They did an experiment recently, and it's a very interesting experiment where they canceled all meetings for a while. And so they wrote a report on it, on what actually happened. And so we're going to be diving deeper into that today as well. And then also, 100 companies in the United Kingdom are trying a 4-day work week. And this is a massive push where by the end of the decade, they want to make sure that most of the companies in the UK are following a 4-day work week because that's like the new thing. Following a 40-hour work week or a 5-day work week is an outdated model, and so they're experimenting with that. And obviously, we've done that sort of thing at AE as well and are still doing it to this day. So we have a lot of insights and ideas that we want to share on that particular topic. But before we dive into all of that stuff, we have a lot of other things to cover as well, including the top 3 favorite resources. So Brooks, what do you have for us here today?
Yeah, so my first resource is the DreamTech L10 Pro Robot Vacuum Cleaner. And this is a Black Friday pickup. And I had heard good things about it online, so I decided to try it out. And so, yeah, it's really great. Actually, back in 2002, my wife and I, for a wedding present, were given a early robot vacuum cleaner, and it was very low tech. And basically the way it worked is it bumped into everything to try to figure out, and it wasn't very smart. So we ended up returning it, but I decided to go back into the robot vacuum cleaner world. And this one has LiDAR. It maps out your whole floor. You can select where you want it to go, where you want it to not go. It has mop, and it goes back to its own charging station. And yeah, we really like it so far. I've been trying it out for a week, and we'll have a link to that. The second one is called Screen Time Plus, which is an iOS app. And what this does is it takes focus modes in iOS and takes it one step further where it pairs it with screen time. So you can have it. The way focus modes usually work is when you go in a specific focus mode, you don't get notifications, which is great. But Screen Time Plus takes it one step further and actually enables blockers that are built into iOS so that you actually can't even get into different apps when you enter a different focus mode. So it's like focus mode on steroids. So that's Screen Time Plus. And then for a book, I'll share a book that I'm actually currently reading. I'm not done yet. I'm about halfway through. It's called Stop Asking Questions: How to Lead High Impact Interviews and Learn Anything from Anyone. And if you're listening to this, you may not be interviewing people. However, I think at least so far, the tips I think can be really helpful, even just relating to people and having conversations. So it's by Andrew Warner from Mixergy. So we'll have links to everything that we share in the show notes by going to theproductivityshow.com or just swipe in your podcast app and the links will be right there. All right, so we're going to get into the topics. What we like to do with these episodes is do a little quick roundup, though, of different news items that we've collected over the last little while. So I'll get started with that. And the first one, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on any of these 10. You can choose what you want to give feedback for. But the first one is a company called Elgato, who I really like, and somehow I'm buying more and more Elgato stuff lately. But Elgato releases Elgato releases a Stream Deck Plus. And if you've listened to the Productivity Show for a while, you'll know that I love my Stream Deck. It's this device that sits on your desk with a bunch of physical buttons that are programmable. So I use it all day, every day to launch setups on my computer, control Zoom, and automate things. I wrote an article about it a while ago, how I use it. So we'll make sure to link to that in the show notes. But Elgato has released a new one called Stream Deck Plus, which actually has fewer physical buttons, but they're bigger. And it also has knobs you can turn, or dials, I guess you could say. And so if you do there's different ways you can use this for video editing, adjusting volume. There's a bunch of different ways you can do it. Support for it isn't quite widespread yet, but I'm really excited to see what people are going to use it for. So that's the first one, the Elgato Stream Deck Plus. The second one is Notion has released where they're going with AI features, and we'll link to this cool video and site that Notion made about that. And we've been talking a lot about AI productivity examples lately because it seems like this is something that's really hitting the productivity world hard. And the examples keep getting like crazier and crazier. And basically, Notion has released an alpha version of their AI features. You can actually sign up for the waitlist now. We'll link to that in the show notes. But it can do things like write an article just from a headline. You can create a meeting agenda just from a topic. You can create a bunch of social media posts from a topic. You can create a job description. You can outline the cons and pros of a topic. You can brainstorm ideas. You can translate, fix grammar. There's just a whole bunch of things you can do from within Notion. And I know right now ChatGPT is another thing that is going out there, but this one is built right inside Notion. So it's just fascinating to see the way that these productivity companies are adding in AI features straight into their service. And then the third note is 1Password has released a passkey demo site. And so we've talked on the podcast a lot about passwords and passkeys, and they're the future of logging in, or at least that's what it seems to be, where you can just do away with passwords altogether. Your device becomes your password. Apple and Google have both embraced passkeys, and I know Apple highlighted it as part of their WWDC. We talked about that a while ago. And the idea is, you don't need a user ID or password. You just log straight in with your device. And you'd think that would mean that password managers are toast, right? But 1Password is really embracing passkeys, and their pitch is that instead of using a passkey from Apple or Google or whatever, use it from a third-party vendor like 1Password so that you're not tied to one ecosystem. So if you're using Apple and Windows or Apple and Android, you can not be tied in and just use 1Password. So they have a demo site where you can learn all about it and how it works, and you can try it out for yourself. So what do you think about that, Tan? Are you going to be going all in on passkeys, or what do you think of AI features? You can give your feedback on anything you want.
Well, first of all, I know you're a big fan of the whole Elgato Stream Deck product line, so the fact that they released a new version of it, which is bigger, smaller in some ways, I think is very interesting. I still haven't bought mine, and I've asked you multiple times whether I should buy it, and you always say yes. So it's been on my list of things to buy, but it's one of those things where I wish I maybe had a little bit more use case for it right away. I know a few things on top of my mind that would be helpful for it. For example, when we're recording, just being able to mute myself, pressing a button would be nice. And I know we have a blog post on this as well, which you've written, which I remember reading about, and I go, oh yeah, I really should get it. So it's been on my list for a while, and now that I have a newer version out, I think I might actually pull the trigger at some point. So once I do, I'm going to have to read your blog post again and go through it, because I'm sure there's been a bunch of new use cases as well since you've written it almost like a year ago now. So I'm really excited to check that out. But also the whole AI movement I think is very interesting, because whatever productivity app is going to embrace it is, I think, going to be a market leader in that particular category. So for example, Notion is now embracing it, and Notion is ever evolving, and we're going to be talking about Evernote a little bit later as well. But I think one of the reasons Notion became so popular was because they addressed a need that Evernote wasn't willing to fulfill, which was collaboration. Now we have Google Docs and everything else too, but Notion really took it a step further, and that's something Evernote never wanted to do, and I think Notion really grew because of that. And so when we look at the AI aspect of things, where if you're new to all of this, you can look at different YouTube videos. Just look at Chat GPT, and there's like new versions of it coming out. But there's also an online interface you can use where you can go to, I believe it's chat.openai.com, and if you go to, you can literally just type in and say, hey, write me a 5-paragraph essay on Romeo and Juliet or something like that, and it will just write it literally in front of you, and you'll see it appearing on screen, which is really cool. So imagine being able to say, hey, write me a bunch of headlines for this topic on productivity, and it would just write a bunch of headlines for you as well. As Notion is embracing this technology as well, I think it can be very predictive in the sense of what you want to do, what you need to do. And I think where it really helps for a lot of people is just, most of us procrastinate because we find that we have a lot of friction getting started. And I think having something like AI or helping us out with eliminating that initial friction, I think it will streamline a lot of work that we do. For example, if I have to write a blog post, one of the things I have to write about is a good title. And writing a good title takes a lot of work, and as anyone on the AE team can testify, we have done a lot of training on copywriting. I always remind people we need to write good headlines, write good titles. But if you have an AI machine just writing it for you, that removes a lot of friction and creates a lot of speed as well. So I think that's going to be a game changer, and I'm really excited for Open AI to really be taking off. And it seems like Notion is like on the forefront of this compared to other productivity apps, which is really exciting. As far as like the whole passkey thing, I think passwords, again, are such an outdated concept as well. I think this next evolution of how we authenticate ourselves is very interesting. I mean, most of us, got used to, for example, remember when we had those phones where we had to put our thumbs on the on the phone to be able to authenticate, right? And now we're used to that, and now we have Face ID. So people are embracing this idea of getting rid of passwords. But I'd be curious to see if passkeys is going to be the next move. I'm not quite. I think we'll see in the next 12 months or so where that is going to be at.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that about using Chat GPT and the ways you can use it. Just before recording, when I was waiting for us to go live, I was scrolling through Twitter just to get, not very productive, but I actually saw a post, and I'll find it and link it, by someone, I don't remember the name, and he was saying that he used ChatGPT and it saved him an hour of work, because for work he needed to do a competitor analysis, like comparing two different competitors, and one of them he wasn't super familiar with. And so what he did is he went to ChatGPT, he just, whatever he typed, tell me about this company, it gave him a bunch of information, and then he could then use that as a starting point. It's not like he only did that, but he used that as a starting point to build off of, and it gave really good feedback. And so he estimated in this tweet that just doing that saved him like an hour or to a half an hour to an hour of work. And this is the sort of thing that AI, even baked into a productivity app, is going to be able to do. It's a pretty cool time, that's for sure. All right, so let's get into our topics that we want to talk about today. And the first one was a shock and kind of not, and Natan, you've already alluded to it before, and that is that Evernote has been sold. We'll have a link to the announcement. It's sold to a company called Bending Spoons. And for me, this is actually really shocking in a way, because Evernote was once considered one of Silicon Valley's biggest unicorns. Like I went to the very first Evernote Trunk conference, and everyone was basically just waiting for Evernote to go public. And so yeah, but then they stagnated, as we've talked about many times on the podcast, and it wasn't clear what was going to happen. People thought maybe Google would buy them, maybe other companies might buy them. And now out of nowhere, this Italian company called Bending Spoons, which mainly makes AI-powered, there's AI again, AI-powered video and image editing software. And yeah, Evernote's going to be part of that now. And Evernote says that development's still continuing. They're rolling out apparently like Google Docs-like multi-editing features and more Microsoft 365 integrations. But, this just puts things up in the air, at least for me. What do you think about this, Tan? Is this a sign to get out of Evernote if you're in there still using it now? And if not, would you recommend somebody get into Evernote now? What do you think about this whole development, Tan? Did it shock you? What do you think?
Yeah, I was pretty shocked to see this. There were no rumors about this whatsoever, at least from the outside. If you're on the inside, maybe. But the fact that Evernote got sold to a smaller company, I think is in a way alarming. It didn't get sold to one of the bigger tech companies. It wasn't sold to one of the competitors, which oftentimes will happen with software companies like that because they're trying to acquire more customers and similar eyeballs and stuff. And that didn't happen. It actually got sold to a quote-unquote relatively small software company based in Italy. And so I thought, okay, that's interesting. That seems almost to me like the company gave up in a way. And the fact that the company who bought it, if you look at all the other apps that they've built, it was all like video and image editing apps. So it was nothing productivity related directly. And so they probably saw an opportunity where they said, this is a distressed asset. It's not going so well. The UI is pretty old. There's not been a lot of major changes and movements in this app. We can probably do it a lot better. I think that in a way is exciting because the apps that I looked into, what they've created seems very beautiful, very streamlined. The marketing behind it seems really good. And I wonder if they can take that to Evernote, right? Now, as a consumer, I am still using Evernote. I'm still using it to this day. I'm still a big fan of it. However, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to everybody moving forward because I just don't know what's going to happen with the company that is now being, transferred to another company. So whenever there's a change of management, you just never know what's going to happen. And so I'm a little bit on the sideline to say, hey, if anybody is recommending a note-taking app, I personally wouldn't say Evernote right now, even though I am personally using it because I've been using it for over a decade now. So if you're thinking about what other note-taking apps you should look into, I would say Notion is a really popular one, especially when collaboration is really important for you. We have Apple Notes, which I think has become such a great tool now. All the tech companies have great note-taking apps now. We have Microsoft with OneNote, we have Google with Keep. So all these big software companies now have their own note-taking version now that is very viable as an alternative to Evernote and other note-taking apps as well.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I'm the same way. I wouldn't personally recommend getting into Evernote now, but I don't think it's necessarily a sign you need to jump out if you're a user and you still like it. If it's still working for you, you don't need to all of a sudden pull the plug. But I definitely would recommend looking at, like you said, something like Notion, something else, or Obsidian if you're into that type of thing. Not the time to get into Evernote now until we see what they're going to do. Maybe it's going to be really cool what they do with the company, maybe now that there's maybe some more energy behind it. But yeah, we'll definitely keep watching. But yeah, this one came out of left field. I always expected Evernote to get sold out, but not like, I'm just glad I wasn't one of the Silicon Valley VCs that put a bunch of money into it, hoping for it to go public, because nope. All right, so let's do topic number 2 now. And I thought this one was really interesting. It's something we've never tried, but I'm fascinated by it. And it's, like you mentioned earlier, Tan, Zapier, which is a company we use a lot. I'm a huge Zapier fan. I was just in there today playing around doing web automation. That's what we use them for. And over the summer, they did an experiment where they just canceled all of their meetings. And they wrote an article about it in Fast Company, and then it was picked up by Cal Newport and other people. And so one of the content writers, like I said, did this write-up about it in Fast Company. And what she said is she was finding that she was spending 10 hours a week in meetings, and that's just for her. She's not a super high-level person. For managers and executives, it was even worse. And what they found is that many people had reported that they were spending more than half of their work week participating in video conferences. And so Zapier wanted to find out like how critical these real-time pre-scheduled collaboration sessions really were. And it was in this context, they created something called the Getting Stuff Done Week, where they wanted to see if they got rid of all meetings, what would happen. And Zapier's People Ops team did a post-experiment survey, and what they found is that 80% of respondents would want to do another Getting Stuff Done week in the future. 80% of respondents achieved their goals for the week. 89% of respondents found that communication to be about as effective during Getting Stuff Done week as during a typical week. And it made me think of our move to meeting day. So for those not familiar, we consolidated all of our meetings to one day so that it would free up time so that we could get stuff done on the other days of the week. And that has been super effective for us. We found that. But it really made me wonder, is there something to just doing these experiments, getting rid of everything? I'm of two minds of this. I mean, nobody likes sitting in meetings. And I actually tried something like this back when I worked in corporate. I did an experiment where I said, okay, we're not going to do department meetings anymore. We all had IM. We communicated via IM. Most of us were sitting in the same area anyway. So I figured, what's the point of spending all this time having meetings when we could just communicate real time? And it definitely freed up a lot of time, but I did feel that something was lost a little bit. I feel like there is some value of taking time to just get all together on the same page with time booked off for sharing experiences and learning. So it was good and bad, I would say, for us. But I'm just curious, Tan, about two things. Number one, what do you think of this idea of getting rid of meetings for a certain period of time or forever? That's number one. And number two, what do you think of this concept of doing productivity experiments? You know, it can take a lot of work and a lot of challenges to do something like this. Do you think it's worth it? Or when you try something like this, does it just make people cranky when everything goes back to normal? Because, you know, Zapier did only do this for a week. It's not like they made this change permanently. What do you think?
Well, personally, I'm all for trying new different things, especially when it comes to experiments, being more productive and combining them somehow. So the fact that they tried this and found it very beneficial, I think is very enlightening. And I think it's something, when I read about it, I thought, oh, maybe that is something that we could do as well. And having also a meeting-free week seems really appealing to me in itself. Even though we have one day dedicated to meetings, even that day in particular is not that long anymore. It's relatively short nowadays too. So the fact that we could consolidate all of our meetings on one day and still do it in maybe less than 2 hours has been very freeing for many of us here. But going away from it completely seems like a crazy idea, and I'm open to trying it. However, I think there are certain meetings that are still valuable to have around having alignment, because I just can't imagine having a demo or a sprint review done asynchronously. I just don't see that being very effective. Whenever we have demo meetings or retros, having them in person or quote unquote, real time seems to be very effective, and we get a lot of learnings and insights, and we actually solve a lot of problems, which has been very effective. It's going 100% remote seems like a great idea, but we've also found that when we have team retreats or we get together in person, there's still a lot of value to be had from being together in the same room, collaborating in the same room, and sharing ideas that way, and training and cross-training and sharing knowledge, so that we still have, the baseline of, okay, we're a remote company, but we still meet in person every now and then. Same thing with this. I think it makes sense if you're in a company where you have a lot of meetings to every now and then have a GSD meeting, right? Get stuff done meeting, or get stuff done week, I should say. And that seems very productive, and I'm sure people are loving it. But I think the root cause of all of this is to say, yeah, we have all these meetings. How do we eliminate them more and more so we have fewer and fewer, so that people can focus most of their time to do the things that they need to do, right? So maybe in a bigger company, a meeting day might be a little challenging because there's just so many departments and meetings and so many people involved. However, if we make our meetings a little bit tighter, shorter, optional as well, I think it can also solve a lot of those problems.
Yeah, I think doing it on a permanent basis, I mean, if you can get away with it, that's great. And there are asynchronous companies, so I'm not saying it can't work. But when you were talking, I was thinking about our sprint review meetings. That's a perfect example because I can think of lots of examples where we're demoing something, sharing something, and just like an idea spark. And it might be something I had never thought of, but then when you are showing something or Marmel is showing something, all of a sudden I think, oh, wait a second. And it's not like we can't, people can record videos and stuff like that. So it's not, you can definitely replicate a lot of it, but I think I'm all for doing this on an experiment basis. And maybe what Zapier might do is do this every summer or something like that for 2 weeks or something like that. That's what we've done with some of our productivity experiments, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But I think doing these productivity experiments are great as long as you make it clear up front that it is a experiment and it is temporary. You want to set those kind of expectations. That's really important.
Well, speaking of experiments, let's move over to the third topic here, which is about the 4-day work week. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier. We have 100 companies in the UK trying a 4-day work week for a while to see if productivity goes up, if employee engagement goes up. And they're having this national campaign where they're truly trying to push this idea of, hey, working 40 hours a week over 5 days is an outdated concept. We are not meant for this. It might have worked in the industrial revolution age, but right now we're in the modern knowledge worker age, and we have to focus on what works there. And working 40 hours a week, 5 days a week, doesn't seem to fit the model. So they're making for a big push here to try to transform the UK into a 4-day work week company, or country, I should say. And I think it's a very interesting proposition, especially since it's backed by the government and they're trying to figure out like, hey, is this a worthwhile experiment for us to do over the next decade, and maybe potentially even transform the company to be 4 days a week, let's say Monday through Thursday, for a majority of companies. I don't think this will apply to every single company, but there's a lot of companies that would benefit from this, and I'm all for it. We have done 4-day work weeks here at AE. We still do them. Typically, the way we do things is every summer we have 2 months of 4-day work weeks, and then during the wintertime, post-Thanksgiving till the new year, we have another set of 4-day work weeks. So in total, people here get 3 months of 4-day work weeks, which is quite awesome. It's almost like an extra 12 days of vacation for everybody in the company. And so we've been a big fan of it. We've done podcast episodes on this topic before, but if you haven't listened to them, what I've noticed is that when you have a 4-day work week, you tend to be able to get all the stuff done you would normally do in 5 days in 4 days. Now, some days might be a little bit longer, and some people do a different variation of it where they do, okay, we're going to take 5 days of work into 4 days, what we're doing now, or we just keep it to 4 days and you're not going to work any longer. Whatever we can do in 4 days in the time limit that we have is just what will be done. So that's another slight variation. And so there's a lot of ways to go about this. I've seen just a lot of benefits from it, from having an extra day of free time to do things you want to do, like your hobbies, working on passion projects, like your side hustle on the side, or just, sleeping in on a Friday morning so that you can just enjoy a 3-day weekend, which I think all of us really enjoy. Every time we have a 4-day work week, I tend to catch up on other things I've always been procrastinating on. So it's like a book I've been wanting to read, or maybe a place that I wanted to visit, or catching up with specific people that otherwise I would never be able to meet. So I've been doing a lot of catching up on my extra days to kind of get up to speed. And when we get back to the 5-day work week after that period, I'm like fully organized and motivated and back into like focus mode. So I've been really enjoying it. How about you, Brooks?
Yeah, this is very top of mind because, like you said, we are just so happens we didn't really plan it this way, but we're in the middle of doing a 4-day work week as we record this episode. And yeah, I think there's a misconception that 4-day work week means you have to shut down the whole company on one day. And so the pushback against it is always, oh, what if you were in customer support? What if I'm in sales? That type of stuff where you feel like, you can't just take a day off. It can be done in a rolling way. Like you don't have to have everybody off on the same day. You could definitely do it on a rolling style. That's what I think a lot of companies do. But this is fascinating how government is actually behind recommending it. So I think that's a really interesting thing. I think the more I've seen 4-day work week stuff in the news more. So I think there is more coming about this, and more companies are going to find that this is a way, like the article you reference, and we'll have a link to it in the show notes, they recommend it as a way to get around to help with inflation. Companies that maybe can't afford to pay higher salary, maybe some of their employees might value the extra time more. So yeah, I've always thought of 4-day work week as a temporary thing, the way we've done it, as a productivity experiment, or at least that's how it started. But this idea of doing it permanently is kind of fascinating. And I think as companies are trying to attract employees more, this might also be a perk that they can offer people. Say, hey, if you come to us, maybe the salary isn't higher, but you have a 4-day work week. And some people might prefer the higher money. Other people might value the time more. So it's all about what you value.
I was sitting in an Uber last week, right before this article came out, and we were talking about a 4-day work week, me and this other guy. And this guy, he works for a big medical sales company, and they sell medical devices. And during COVID, during the early pandemic days, they had a rule in place where anybody who made over $100,000 a year would get a 30% pay cut for a few months, and to be able to stabilize the company and stuff like that. And now that things are back to normal, things are moving back to normal again for them in terms of the pay that they get. But also when he heard about this whole idea of the 4-day work week, he immediately jumped out and said, "Wow, like I would have rather preferred to have a 4-day work week and even take a pay cut at the same time rather than working 5 days a week for all these long hours." And it would actually motivate him to stay longer at the company, but also he would find a lot more happiness and time for the things that he wants to do outside of work as well. So he was all for it. And I thought it was a really interesting perspective that he even said that he wanted to take a pay cut to be able to do something like that. Because I think as we get older, we start to realize the value of our time a lot more. And that's not always about work. And so especially when you have children, that's something I've noticed with a lot of people, is that having that extra day means a lot more to them because it's able to spend time with their family and take them out, or be able to do certain excursions that otherwise wouldn't be possible, especially when they're really young. So I think there's a lot of benefits to it. And if you're listening to this and you are running a company or running a team, or you have the influence to potentially try a 4-day work week, that's something I would definitely encourage you to do so.
All right. Other than going in and trying to negotiate a 4-day work week, hopefully without a pay cut, what recommendation do you have for people to take out of this episode? What action do you want people to take?
Yeah, we always have a lot of things that we cover in every single episode. But if there's one thing that stood out to you, what I would recommend you do right now is just write it down. So write down the action step or the idea that you have from this episode and start thinking about when you are going to take action on it. Maybe it's right after this episode, maybe it's tomorrow, but make a commitment to write it down and take action on it in the next 24 hours. And I think you're going to see some great results and progress from doing that. So thank you again for listening to The Productivity Show. You can find all the show notes at theproductivityshow.com, or just swipe in your favorite app. And thank you again for being here with us. We'll see you next time.